Hello, my fellow biologists. Welcome to Unit 2. Today we're going to be learning about cell theory and cell types. Make sure to have your guided note packet out and a writing utensil. Cell theory is a scientific theory first formulated in the 1800s by multiple scientists that form one of the basic principles of biology. It wasn't formulated earlier than that because they didn't have microscopes to be able to see the microscopic world, which would allow them to explore cells. These scientists, Schwann, Schneiden, and Virchow, came up with three stances that explain cell theory. The first, all organisms are made up of cells. The second, cells are the basic unit of life. And the third one is cells come from other pre-existing cells. Before we dive into cell theory and its parts, we are going to talk in general about a living thing and what it can be classified as. First off, all living things can be classified into a kingdom. Now, there are 6 kingdoms that we currently know. We say currently because we are always discovering new things. So we have archaebacteria and eubacteria. These are our 2 bacteria kingdoms. Now, archaebacteria are older bacteria that tend to live in really crazy places, such as like really acidic, really hot, and really cold places. Now, our eubacteria is also known as true bacteria, and those are the ones that are all around us, living in our skin and even in our digestive systems. So then we have animals, plants, fungus, and protists. They also have scientific names like Animalia, Plantae, Fungi, and Protista. Here are some images that help us make sure that we know what these kingdoms contain. For example, animal kingdom, we are animals, humans fall into the animal kingdom, along with insects, crabs, fish, birds, and a lot of other things. Fungi are our decomposers like mushrooms, molds, things like that. Plants or plantae, these are all of our plant organisms that we know are autotrophs or producers able to get their energy directly from the sun. Then we have protists. Protists are these leftover kingdom where we tend to throw things that are made up of complex cells like eukaryotic, but we don't really know where to put them. So they're like animals, but not animal, fungi-like, but not fungus, and plants, but not like plants. And then you also have our archaebacteria and eubacteria, which are our bacteria. Let's talk about the first component of cell theory. All living things are made up of cells or a cell. Some organisms are very simple and very tiny and are only one cell. We call this a unicellular organism. When we look at the etymology or the breakdown of a word, we have uni, which means one, and cell meaning unit. So an organism that's just made up of one unit, and again, this is one cell, is the whole individual organism. This is not a lot of complexity or specialized cells because it literally is just one cell. The kingdom that compose unicellular organisms are bacteria, our archaebacteria, and our eubacteria. But there are some protists that are also unicellular, and actually most of them are. Now, multicellular organisms have many cells. These organisms that can have 2 or more cells, sometimes even trillions of cells. Cells of a multicellular organism are called body cells, or the more scientific word would be somatic cells. And I'll have you guys underline that word just like you see it on your screen. That will be an important term for you guys to know later on down the road. An example in humans would be skin cells, muscle cells, blood cells, eye cells. But other organisms that are multicellular, like plants, they have leaf cells, stem cells, and root cells. These cells may look different and have different functions, but they are all still a part of the organism that is multicellular. The kingdoms that do this are animals, plants, fungi, and of course protists, although there's not as many. Now remember that protists can be both unicellular and multicellular depending on what species, And I would like for you guys to write some with the lines pointing towards our kingdoms of life, just like you see on your screen. The second part of cell theory is cells are the basic unit of organisms, and we're going to learn the components of a cell. So every cell consists of cytoplasm. That's the organism that makes up the interior of a cell. All cells have a cell membrane. That's the barrier organelle. The cell membrane lets things in and out of the cell. Sometimes we call this the plasma membrane. All cells have proteins, and these proteins are pretty important actually. They make up organelles and also help the cell function. Now, if we have proteins, then we have to have the protein maker organelle, which is ribosome. So please write that in your notes. It's in red. Lastly, all living things are made up of DNA and RNA, and in those cells, because remember, an organism can be either unicellular or multicellular, every single cell is going to have that DNA and RNA. They'll come in handy when we're trying to make more cells, and also come in handy when we're trying to again pass on hereditary material. We know that the basic unit of life is a cell, but there are also two types of cells. The first one we are going to be learning about are prokaryotes. Prokaryotes, pro means before, so we tend to sometimes classify these as the cells that came earlier versus the cells that came later. And then we have karo, which is the root word meaning kernel. We know that prokaryotes can be divided into two kingdoms, eubacteria and archaebacteria. You'll notice that the word bacteria is underlined because if it's bacteria, it has to be a prokaryote. We can look at a cell and know it's a prokaryotic cell because it will not have a nucleus. You'll just see the DNA that looks like a balled up string in the cytoplasm just floating around. If you notice in the two pictures on the right side of your screen, the DNA is free floating. It's not in a nucleus. So prokaryotes are very small, 15 times smaller than the other type of cell that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. Prokaryotes are very simplistic. They don't have much going on inside. They really just have cytoplasm, cell membrane, DNA, um, circular DNA just floating around. There's no membrane-bound organelles like a nucleus or chloroplast. And here are some pictures of bacteria. You'll notice again, they're very simplistic. They're always unicellular. The second type of cell that we're going to be talking about is a eukaryotic cell or eukaryotes. The etymology that we need to know is eu meaning true and karo meaning kernel. We know that there are four kingdoms that make up this cell. We have plants, animals, fungi, and protists, meaning they are specialized and more complex than our prokaryotic cells. As humans, all of our cells are eukaryotic, and we can look at a cell and know it's eukaryotic because it's going to have a nucleus. It's going to be much larger, like 15 times larger than a prokaryotic cell, and it's also much more complex. So we're going to take a look at all of the organelles that are inside of eukaryotic cell. So if you look at the pictures on the right of your screen, that is what a eukaryotic cell looks like. If you compare the eukaryotic cells against our prokaryotic cells, you can see a vast difference. Our eukaryotic cells also have membrane-bound organelles, so they will have the nucleus, the chloroplast, and the mitochondria, like I mentioned previously. And here are some microscopic images of cells from these four kingdoms. So we have an image of plants. Here are some skin cells from a human, or so the animal kingdom. We have fungal cells, and then we have unicellular protists. Some eukaryotic cells can actually be multicellular or unicellular. Most of them, though, are multicellular with protists. The last component of cell theory. So cells come from other pre-existing cells. The previous cell theory was also known as the spontaneous generation theory. This stated that at one point they thought that you could have something living that could come from something non living. This is how they would try and explain away the phenomenon of food going bad. They couldn't see the bacteria because it was microscopic, or they couldn't see a fly laying an egg and then the egg hatching and turning into a maggot. They just magically thought maggots showed up or just appeared out of nowhere. But now we know through microscopes and other types of tools and technology that that's not where things come from, and that if you have something that's living, it has to come from another living cell. We know that there are processes that allow cells to make more cells, and some of these processes are mitosis, meiosis, budding, fragmentation, and binary fission. We are actually going to dive a little bit deeper and learn more about all of those in later lessons. But one thing we do know is that cells are always going to originate from something that is living, not something that has died or damaged. Again, it is a living cell. Before we break and start our practice, let's briefly discuss or talk about a virus. Is it alive? Is it not alive? So let's go over what we know. Viruses are tiny. They're also microscopic. They're actually tinier than bacteria. We know that they have DNA or RNA and that it's composed of that with a protein coat, but that's all it has. They don't have DNA and RNA. They only have one or the other. And with that, we can already sort of start to say that no, it doesn't actually compose of something living. It's not like bacteria that have both DNA and RNA. There are some things, again, that a cell has to have, and there are things that viruses are missing from that. Now it's time to talk about your practice. We have a Venn diagram of things that we have in common versus things that are not. What's in the middle is what's in common. The things that are in the outer part of the circle are not. I'm going to help you with a few. We know that prokaryotics and eukaryotics have cell membrane, ribosome, and cytoplasm. We also know they have DNA and RNA. We also know that they're made up of at least one cell, and they have the same root word, which is karo, that means kernel. Those are all of the ones that we want to have in the center. You're going to write down what the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell ones are on your own. The next part is a true or false. You're going to write if the statement is true, just write true and move on. If the statement is false, you're going to write false, but also try to replace the underlined word with something that would make it true. Once you're done with both of those practices, you're done with your lesson notes. Great job and have a great day.